We can start. I've been saying good morning. I think this will be the third time I'm saying good morning, and I'm in Cape Town. The most popular language in Cape Town is isiXhosa. When you greet one person in isiXhosa, you say molo. When you greet more than a few people, you say molweni, molweni. Welcome to day 2 of the World Science Forum. After last night's exceptional opening with Our Excellency President Ramaphosa laying, I think, a foundation and challenging all of us to think and think boldly, I'm happy and it's a privilege and an honor to be chairing this session today. My name is Sarah Moswetsa. I represent an organization called the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, an entity of the Department of Higher Education. I want to greet all of you today, this morning. The session for this morning is titled, What Role for Science in Fighting Poverty, Unemployment, Inequality, and Exclusion? As noted by our President and our Honorable Minister Nzimande, for us as scientists in this room, as thinkers in this room, as scholars in this room, our task is to think about social justice, but not just to think about social justice, to do something about social injustice in our countries and in the world. And we can only do that if we at least think about and come up with recommendations and a way forward on poverty, unemployment, inequality, and exclusion. The session this morning, we're going to have a keynote address by someone that I respect very much, and especially because she represents the social sciences at UNESCO. Her name is Professor Gabriela Ramos, an Assistant Director General for Social Sciences and Human Science at UNESCO. She will give a keynote address this morning. Following that, we will have a panel of, again, individuals, scholars, who are exceptional and distinguished, that I also have enormous respect for, and I will introduce them after our keynote address. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start this session by calling on stage Professor Ramos to address us.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. And good morning, everybody. And I'm very pleased to be in front of you. And Sarah, we are both from social and human sciences. And we actually, in this social and human sciences, believe that they are key for the changes that we need to go about in terms of achieving social justice. The whole WSF is going to be discussing this question of how do we align the production of science, the thinking of science, to redress the situation as we see it in terms of social justice. Very plainly, social justice upholds the idea that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. And with this very first observation, we might be agreeing that we are not where we need to be in terms of everybody having these equal opportunities. So my keynote today has 2 elements that I already advanced yesterday in the plenary session. First, that science is essential in ending the crisis facing humanities. But second, and more importantly, that science must be defended from vested interests and decision-making structures and prevented from fulfilling its role in advancing human development. So science for decision-making, science for policy-making, science for outcomes, not only science for science. I think that, of course, we have here a lot of researchers that purposefully do just research, and that's fine. But for me, the social and human sciences need to impact decision-making, and more in the times we are living. On the brink of New Year, the world faces a daunting array of challenges: the climate emergency, the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, the war, growing inequalities, and all the humanitarian crises that we have experienced. And although this assessment seems bleak, this juncture is one of the most important that we have faced in a generation. And history has shown and has proven that science can deliver for people. Be it the Grand Revolution that increased agricultural yields by nearly 50% in the last 4 decades and helped avoid mass starvation, the medical innovations that enable a spectacular increase of life expectancy of 14 years in the same period, or the introductions of vaccines that prevent 4 million deaths every year, science has delivered. And I have to say that science delivered during the COVID pandemic by bringing not one, 4 vaccines in 1 year, which was really a very short period when you consider that vaccines need to be deployed in 4 to 8 years. But as I said, while natural science have allowed for this progress to materialize, the profound changes driven by philosophical and sociological transformation have been just as crucial for our societies. They allow us to understand and sometimes manage the forces driving human societies and, by extension, the causes behind complex social issues. And I don't need to go very far to show that natural sciences that delivered the vaccines confronted the misinformation, the anti-vax movement, all those confusion that was created by false narratives, and therefore it's not enough to have the breakthroughs in natural science. We need to combine it and see how do we introduce these kind of successes into societies that have their own feelings, their own mindset, their own way of thinking about things. And I can tell you, I'm guilty of charge. I did not convince one of my most beloved person in the world to take the vaccine, and it's not because he's crazy. My dad is one of the most cultivated persons. He didn't want to, and therefore I think it's very important that we do this combination. Social and human sciences have had a major role in changing our approach and relationship with environment, our relationship with other humans, our relationship on gender, and developing new frameworks to understand power relationship and the question about economic thinking. And I think this is very important because one of the most important frameworks that have dominated and informed our policies has to do with the economics. And the economic thinking, I think, is as important as any other science in determining the outcomes that our societies are living. And this is where I come from, because I come from the economic world. So let me just, by refreshing on the question of why it's not about science, but how do we use science to deliver for social justice, let me take you through 4 areas where I feel science has delivered better than the outcomes that we have in our societies. The first one, inequality. Second, gender policies. Third, artificial intelligence. And 4, climate. In 2016, the World Science Report of UNESCO already proved how much inequalities were compounding. Inequalities of income, inequalities of opportunities, inequalities of wealth, and then how these inequalities were delivering inequalities of access to information, access to politics, access to decision-making, and then you get this very vicious cycle of societies that are excluding a lot of people and that are taking decisions that are not scientifically led. We know that it's not only about income, it's about, as I said, opportunities, but if you consider that wealth distribution, 50% of world wealth, it's concentrated in the top 10% income decile, we're starting in a very wrong way. Already Piketty said it. If wealth is growing exponentially, and income is just augmenting little by little, these inequalities are just going to skyrocket, and this is exactly what is happening. But it's also distorting the power relationships. It's also distorting the decision-making that needs to be made, because influence is also very, very unequally distributed. And it's not about science, because if you think about how the economic profession has really advanced in understanding the drivers of inequality, how much, if you are born in a low socioeconomic family, your chances to reach higher level education are reduced by 3 times. How much, if you are in that really backward families, you will have less chances to get a good job. You will have less chances to finish your degree in university. And therefore, these are compounding things, and we know them. They're there. And therefore, we just need to short-circuit the inequalities that breed inequalities, and we know that. And we started by measuring household disposable income. Instead of going for per capita aggregates, you go for household disposable income, and just changing that metrics allows you to see all these divergences in terms of the outcomes for people in life. And I feel that science has delivered, but not the policies that need to be taken to redress this situation. And this is the call. I think this should be the call of the World Science Forum. Make science count and go for the policies that will really reverse this dynamic. The most dangerous science dismissing is being committed in the case of climate change. And as I said yesterday, I don't think, and I'm in front of many scientists, I don't think that we need to prove how much human action is having this impact in our environment. I don't need to convince you that we need to change tracks to avoid these collision curves with nature. We have all the elements. The UNFCCC has presented year after year their analysis showing how much is necessary to change the energy mix, the consumption patterns, the production patterns. It's very clear, it's there. To put a tax on carbon, we know it. We know how these things work. And of course, we're despair, because when you see the outcomes of the COP27 in terms of the national determined contributions, they're not enough, nowhere near to get us to a good path. And on the contrary, 10 years ago, I was working on a piece to show how important was to phase out subsidizing fossil fuel consumption. Now with the energy prices, what we have is a huge increase. There were 300 billion last year, now it's 600. And therefore we're just going against what science is telling us what to do. Similarly, the loss of the diversity and ecosystem integrity will undermine our efforts on 80% of assessed SDG targets, making it even more challenging to report progress on poverty, hunger, health, and water. And yet, the negotiations that have started at the COP15 in Montreal, and we're still not sure if the target of protecting 30% of land and ocean will be agreed upon, as its contents remain the object of sharp disagreements and bargaining chips among parties. And this is something that President Ramaphosa mentioned yesterday, international cooperation, multilateralism. But multilateralisms also need to be based on evidence and scientific basis. But it's not. It's about something else. It's about defending national interests in the way that we have framed them. Another area where I have been really working a lot is in gender equalities, or inequalities. And the fact is that there we have the bulk of evidence. We have been proving how much, if we change the gender patterns of discrimination, our economies could be stronger, our societies could be stronger, inequalities could be reduced. We know it, and this is not an apology of women, it is an apology of having 50% of the population fulfilling their full potential. And if we're going to talk about justice, I don't think we can talk about justice without bringing the realities in which many women live in this world. Not only in terms of not having the same opportunities and define their life expectations since they are born, but also living with violence, living with precarity, being overrepresented in the low-income groups, in the groups that live with precarity. I think this is really important. If we are going to talk about social justice, we cannot leave women behind. And here again, we have had a lot of analysis that prove how much certain family-friendly policies, dual parental leaves, legislating equality can deliver, but we're not just making progress on that, we're backtracking. If girls in Afghanistan cannot go to school, if women in Iran cannot be dressed in certain ways, if women in the US cannot have access to safe reproduction practices, we are backtracking. And therefore, it's not about science. It's about politics. It's about mindsets. And therefore, this is my call. How do we ensure that we, the scientists, can bring together all this evidence to change the course and advance better deliveries for the world? And we have it since the very beginning. I mean, the fact is that women, because of stereotyping, because of gender roles, because they carry the bulk of care economy, paid and unpaid. The unpaid work means women spend 2 to 3 to 5 to 7 hours per day on the care economy, taking care of children, taking care of families, taking care of the elderly, being the social workers, and sometimes non-paid. And I don't see what can be more unfair than working without any recognition, any reward, any pay. And I think this is one of the things, and I belong to the Gender Equality Advisory Council of Chancellor Scholz, and one of the things that I told the German Chancellor was, we really need to take into account international statistics, the unpaid work, and reward it. Because there's nothing worse than working and then not being recognized, not contributing to pensions, not contributing to any kind of economic activity. And therefore, I think this is one of the issues that is very important. The wage gap continues to be 12%. The gap in the labor force participation continues to be from 7% in Canada to 40% in South Africa, 30% in Mexico. So these are the issues that we need to take into account. And then the evidence again, the evidence. There have been very important studies showing how much, when you have women at the top, decision-making become more diverse, and even companies become much more productive. And this is proven, but I don't think that we are hearing the science again in this issue. Finally, the digital transformation. Of course, again, we are completely amazed by the power of these technologies, by the services they provide, by the rapidity and the impressive progress that we have made in so many ways. Again, the COVID vaccine could not have been discovered if we didn't have the analytical capacities of artificial intelligence. Humans would have taken years to analyze the array of data that these technologies could done in one day. But again, how are we framing the technologies to deliver better and to control the downsides? How do we deal with misinformation? How do we deal with hate speech? How do we deal with meddling with democracies? How do we deal with the reproduction of biases and discrimination that is happening in the digital world as we have it in the real world? And these are the right questions, not whether we like or not the digital transformation, because that's irrelevant. What is important is, are we shaping it in the way that help us with the SDGs, in the help to deal with all these issues that I have shared with you? And the answer is, I'm not sure. I think that all the downsides are really chasing us and not delivering for good. And everything starts with, again, a very unequal distribution of who is really playing a role in the development of the technologies. High concentration, again, only 5 countries, and I would say only 2 countries, China and the US, producing the bulk of these developments. The investments, and therefore, of course, you produce the substance in English or in one language, and the diversity of the world is left behind. The way we gather data, who owns the data, who governs the data, who shares the data, determines how much power you have to participate in the digital transformation or not. And it's not only a question of the global south and the global north, it's a question of big enterprises and small and medium-sized enterprises that might be just prevented from participating in the development of new products because they don't have the data and they don't have the technical infrastructure. And therefore, again, we know it. This might contribute to a more unequal world and is contributing to a more unequal world, and therefore we need to shape the digital transformation in a very different way. To finish my presentation, I want to finish with a more optimistic message. At UNESCO, we are trying to, again, bring this evidence to our policymakers. We are a multilateral institution, and therefore we talk to our members. And I was really proud that in November 2021, we have 193 countries signing to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Ethics is super important. I spent 20 years at the OECD, and we were always talking about inclusive growth. When I moved to UNESCO, which is more global, more universal, with this fantastic mandate, they tell me, you are in charge of ethics. I said, well, that's a very big mandate. But at the end, the ethical framework is about this. It's about positive social outcomes, it's about respect, it's about human rights-based approach, it's about all the things we care about. And the way we framed the ethics of artificial intelligence was exactly that. Is this contributing to enhance human rights and human dignity? Is the technology contributing to deliver for a more just, fair world, non-discrimination? Is it contributing for environmental sustainability because it's highly energy consumption technologies? And again, it's a black and white response if we don't have these ethical guardrails. And therefore, we went to the very straightforward notion to say, okay, we need transparency, we need accountability, we need rule of law, we need rules of the game to redress the wrong outcomes that sometimes we get with this technology, and we got it signed. But more importantly, what we did in this recommendation was not just to stay with the high-level goals, which are inspiring and really interesting, but to go for policy decisions. And we have 11 chapters on health, on labor, on the environment, on gender, on education, on culture, with very concrete policies to change the stance. And now we are implementing it because there is also this very important point of implementing. Second point, we produce a publication, Inclusive and Resilient Societies. And those of you that are human or social scientists, you know that narratives matter. And the narrative has always been regulation stifle innovation, let's go for efficiency, we go for maximizing growth, and then we redistribute, and that narrative didn't work. And therefore, the narrative that we are developing in this report is to say, let's bring equity and sustainability ex ante. Let's not grow and go for efficiency first, and then we redistribute. Let's bring the equity considerations beforehand and factor them in the policy decision making. And finally, let me just say that for gender, as we have seen that so many countries have made progress in adopting the right policies, dual parental leave, legislating equality, giving support to women, but progress is so slow, we decided that we need to change mentalities. The fact we need to bring men with us, because it's not about men or women, it's about these mentalities that capture certain people in one role and certain other people in another role. And therefore, I invite all the men in the group here to become part of our champions in changing mentalities, because that's exactly what we need to change. The role modeling, the stereotyping, and the way we think about the issues. Final comment, I recommend that you take a look at the 2017 recommendation on science and scientific research that we adopted at UNESCO, because this is the frame in which we want to see science. Science for human rights, science that informs policies, science that benefits all, science that allows for scientific freedom, science that is not manipulated, and science that informs and changes policies. And this is what I really want to leave with you for the reflections going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ramos. And we know why, as South Africa, with the leadership of our minister, who's present here, Minister, welcome, why we work very closely with UNESCO and with particularly yourself in thinking about science as all sciences. Social sciences are sciences. I am particularly pleased that you touched on the importance of science for its own sake is important, but where we are as the world, as particularly also South Africa and the continent, we need to make sure that science moves away from just science for its own sake, but science that resolves inequalities and that you've clearly articulated. The one thing that I think I heard as well last night, and you also touched on it, is that as scientists, all of us in this room, we have the power to change the world. If we insist that as natural scientists, when we come up with vaccines, we work closely with social scientists. It means then, as we release our work of a vaccine or vaccines for vaccines, we insist that there's access. Then we move from science as just science for its own sake, but science as a deeply political project that all of us should engage in. My role is not to give input. Thanks, Professor Ramos. Let me introduce individuals, as I said, that are well known in our context as part of our World Science Forum. They are going to give us 10-minute input, and as I call them on stage, I would ask them to please sit in the order that I'm going to call them, and then they'll give their input. The first speaker, again, requires no introduction, is Professor Raimi Curion, Chief Scientist of Quebec, President of the International Network for Governmental Science Advice. The one impressive thing about the World Science Forum, which I'm very pleased about, is that yes, we talk transformation, gender, age, and many other things, but we also take it seriously. Representing the Global Young Academy, we also had one of your colleagues joining us last night, is Raul Iglesi Lutz. I have respect for everyone. This individual I have enormous respect for. In South Africa and the world, she doesn't need much introduction. She's Professor Olive Shisana, Special Advisor on Social Policy to the President of South Africa, the Presidency. It's an honor and a privilege today to have amongst ourselves and to give her own input, Her Royal Highness Sumaya bint El Hassan, President of the Royal Scientific Society of Jordan. Royal Highness, you join us on stage. I saw her earlier on. I think she's sitting right at the back. Oh, you were being mic'd? Okay, that's okay. Thanks for joining us. He's been very instrumental in the life of the World Science Forum. Our last speaker is Michelle Kazekin, Senior Fellow, Graduate Institute. As he joins us, we will have their input for 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a round of discussion with question and answers from all of you. Thanks.
Bonjour, bon matin à tous. Highness, Commissioner, Minister, colleague, friends, really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And maybe I could start by saying I agree with Dr. Ramos, so maybe we could save time and I could just sit. So basically, really agree with many of the points that you made in your plenary lecture. I changed my brief talk after listening to the President of the Republic of South Africa yesterday. Probably many of you heard him, and really it was a call for action. We know, as Dr. Ramos said, we know it. Now we need to act. And for those of you who know me a little bit, that's really what I like the most, action. So I think that's what we need to do now. So maybe to put that in the context, a few words on, on my day job. In Quebec, as a Quebec chief scientist, I advise the government of Quebec on all aspects of science and innovation. Of course, I have a lot of friends that help me. In addition to that, I'm the president of the three funding organizations: Health, Science and Engineering, Social Science, Humanities, Art and Culture. So for us, for the past few years, really we focus on the multidisciplinarity type of approach to solve or to find new strategy to solve the big challenge of our society, like climate change, like social justice. Another key point for the Quebec Research Fund is the next generation of scientists. Many here, the Global Young Academy and others, these are our future. So we need to invest into them, and we need to train them probably a little bit differently from the way I was trained, so to be more open to multidisciplinary type of approach. I'm also, as was mentioned, for the past year, the president of the International Network for Government Science Advice, INGSA. And what is INGSA? For those of you who may not know as much about the organization, it's capacity building in science advice. We have about 5,000 members in 130 countries. We are organized by chapter. The first chapter here in Africa, the first workshop of INGSA here in South Africa. And many of the leaders of the chapter are here today, and I would really like to thank them for all their work. So few words on science. In a nutshell, science is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Not in a sense of power, but in a sense of empowering those who know a bit more about science. And that must have impact on social justice. To get there, because of course we're not there, for me, and I think for many of us, one of the key challenges in the Sustainable Development Goal is education. And yes, all the goals of the Sustainable Development Goal are all critically important. But I would suggest that education is probably even more critical than many others. And education for all, everywhere in the world. And maybe we need to change somewhat the way we do education in various countries. The UNESCO also had work on that, what they call creative education. Also, we need to consider now the digital revolution. So I think education over the next little while, next decade, is absolutely essential if we want to move the needle. As part of education, of course, you have science literacy. And again, science literacy for all and everywhere. Science literacy gives power to individuals, give power to community, you're better equipped to face big problem of our society. Maybe you can even create your own job when you know a little bit more about, you have a bit more science literacy. And also, this can promote equity and inclusiveness. Another benefit of science literacy, and it was mentioned by Dr. Ramos, when you have a bit more science literacy, it's a way, it's not absolute, but it's a way to fight disinformation, misinformation, fake news, and also to promote democracy. Of course, achieving this is not easy, and we must all work together, like coming from Quebec, from Canada, small region, small country in terms of population. We have to work with you, to the rest of the world, and especially with Africa, if you want to make it happen and make sure that everyone has access to high-quality education, education that take into consideration the culture and the knowledge of the community. This is something that we have been trying to do in Canada, in Quebec, for the past few years. We're not there yet. We still have various communities, indigenous communities, that have trouble to have access to high-quality education that take care of their knowledge, that include their knowledge. And there, here, on that topic, we could certainly learn from you in Africa, in South Africa, working together to come up with new solutions to make sure that indigenous population have access to high-quality education. Few more words on some of the priority that we have in Quebec and at the Quebec Research Fund in relation to science literacy. UNESCO at the forefront of that, open science, access to publication. This is absolutely essential. A lot of research worldwide is supported by public funds, so it should be accessible to scientists, of course, of all disciplines, but also to the public, also to policymakers. So very, very important. And in Quebec, the Quebec Research Fund, we are supporting about 60 journals, mostly in the field of social science and humanities, that publish original paper in French. And it was mentioned also by Dr. Ramos. Of course, most of science, in any discipline, most of it is published in English. But it's not everyone that speaks English. And it's not just a matter of a Google Translate. We need to adapt it to make sure that the culture is taken into consideration when you publish in French, you publish in Spanish, you publish in other languages. So I think it's important, and it's a matter of equity, to make sure also that you have access to publication, scientific original publication in various languages. Key is also science journalism, science journalists, because they are a link between high-level policymaker, scientific community, and the public. We supported about 20 science journalists from all over the world to come to this meeting, but that's not enough. It's the beginning. We need to do much more, and we need to promote the career of science journalists. ADI, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, of course, it was quite a bit mentioned. Now in our program, when they apply to our program, they have to include consideration related to ADI. And yes, of course, gender, but also age, also communities, also indigenous communities, for example, immigrant, very, very important. And there again, here again, we have to collaborate. If we do it only us in Quebec, the impact will be very limited. We need to collaborate with you. Sustainable Development Goal, I already mentioned about education. When we started to include that in our program, a good proportion of the scientific community reacted and said, that's none of your business. You basically should fund the research, but you don't have to ask us to think if our research is related at all. to SDGs. Well, I think it's wrong. I think it will take time. Probably you need to change the culture a little bit, but we need to, again, to work together in partnership to make sure that more people, more scientists take into consideration the SDGs in their research. One key project that we will announce next week, I will announce next week when I'm back in Montreal at the COP15, is what we call One Planet, One Planetary Health. We have One Health a lot, but we try to be a bit broader here. So climate change, biodiversity, and the impact on all living organisms. And hopefully there, again, we'll be able to do partnership and working with you. My last point will be, as funders of science, we also have to empower citizens. In participatory research, in citizen science. So, and here, it really need to be, the lead need to be from the citizen. The first few times we did the call, basically in the end of the day, it was really the scientist that was taking over. So we need to make sure it's co-construction and the citizen stay in charge. And it's not necessarily for us the result of the research project. It's more that all of us work together and we understand a little bit better the scientific methods. So the COVID pandemic, of course, crisis all over the world, but science has never been as much on the forefront. And we should not waste a good crisis. So we have to make sure that science stays at the forefront, but science and scientists will have to change a little bit in relation to ADI, in relation to the SDGs, in relation to science for social justice. Thank you very much.
Good morning to everyone. Firstly, coming from the University of Pretoria, I would also like to welcome you to our beautiful country. I hope you all fall in love with it. I did that and stayed for 16 years, so be careful if you fall too much in love with it. Second, I would like to thank the organizers of the World Science Forum Cape Town for including us actively and not only in paper, not only a tick box in a list. We are here as Global Young Academy, early career researchers, and we are included, we are around the table. Finally, we are around the table. So, being around the table, we also are impatient. We also are frustrated, and sometimes we can't take any more discussions about inequality, any more discussions about non-inclusivity and lack of diversity. We are frustrated as the next generation. We are frustrated that poverty still exists. And not only exists, but after the pandemic, it became worse. We were making progress as a planet, and it became worse. We've heard from the previous speakers, and you will see when there is an overlap between speakers, that means the issues are taken seriously from every perspective. So we've heard that scientific and technological advancements, progress, are there. We are many scientists in the world that we make a difference. We produce scientific results. We also have heard that there are reports, there is data that shows that the global societal challenges are not fixed. So what is happening? What can we do about it? We have a mismatch somewhere. And in a very typical Global Young Academy and Science Leadership Program language, we see challenges as opportunities, and we convert the statements of challenges into questions. How might we change the world? How might we unblock these problems that are hurdles between science, scientific development, scientific production, knowledge, and the society and the communities. How might we find ways to overcome these hurdles? And today I'm just going to give 2 points. I'm sure if we continue the discussion, there's more than 2 points. Already some of them were discussed. So the one is communication of science. And the moment I say that, I'm sure the majority of you are thinking of how a scientist communicates their findings. But today I'm going to bring another focus. I'm going to bring the focus to the scientist as a listener to problems. And I'm going to give also a few examples about that. Gone are the times that the scientist is sitting, those times, in his lab, not anymore, sitting and producing knowledge and getting out there and saying, this is what needs to be done, these are the problems I've solved, and that's it. We are past that. We're gone that. It's not my way or the highway anymore. The best researchers I've known and the best studies we have looked around is the ones that are informed by communities, informed by society, and the ones that make an impact by understanding the needs and the conditions of what happens where. We've heard in some of the side events in the beginning of the week the idea of a cultural intellect, cultural differences. So 2 short examples. The one comes from Nobel laureates in economics, Professors Duflo and Banerjee in their book Poor Economics. So they discuss about a rural community in India where they've discovered there's a big difference between the deaths in baby boys versus baby girls. And these deaths were all connected to water-related diseases. So what would the obvious thing to do was the local government and scientists got in together and try and examine the water quality, as well as the differences, the physiological differences between boys, baby boys, and baby girls. Because surely that's where the problem lies. Surely, sitting in my office, seeing this data, that's where I will start searching for. However, they could not find anything. Yes, water quality improved, but still the difference between the two was significant. So to solve the problem, the research team went and stayed for a few months with the community to find out what is the real problems here, what are we looking at? And what they have discovered is something that was not shown into data. And if you didn't go and stay there, you wouldn't direct your cultural mind to go there. So what happens is in these communities, a baby boy is more appreciated than a baby girl. So when a mother gives birth to a baby boy, she's not only allowed but encouraged to breastfeed for a long time to make sure that this baby is healthy. Contrary, when a baby girl is born, the mother is suggested to let go of breastfeeding as quickly as possible and try to fall pregnant again so that she brings the appreciated baby boy to the family. That makes baby girls drink water, bad quality water, earlier in their life than baby boys, and therefore being exposed because their immune systems are not developed yet. Yes, the water quality was an issue, but lots of resources were put into finding the physiological differences between boys and girls, where actually the problem was somewhere else. It was cultural. Another example that from personal experience is, I've heard, or I read a study a few years ago, that apparently African citizens are resisting the adoption of LED light bulbs. They don't want to. They're too scared. They don't like the technology. That's what the whole study was saying. It's a cultural thing. They don't want the new technology. In 2018, when I visited Abuja in Nigeria, I made it a point to, every time I was meeting a local, I was asking, why don't you have LED light bulbs? And the answer was unanimous. It's not that we don't want to. We actually try to. What happens is we have very frequent power cuts. So you see the example was for Nigeria on purpose. We have very frequent power cuts, and the LED light bulbs are too sensitive. They break, they burn when these electricity power cuts come. They're on and off the whole time. Therefore, something that we thought it's going to save us money and energy, eventually does not. So we tried. We were open to the new technology, but it doesn't work in our environment, in our conditions. So many resources would have been put into awareness and education and discussion about cultural differences between African citizens and European or global North citizens. The problem was different. So if we as scientists don't sit and listen, we might spend time, effort, and precious resources into problems we think, from our perspective, exist, but actually they don't. Second quick point I would like to make is scientific solutions and technological advancements in the past were discipline-specific. There was one problem, and I would solve it as an economist from an economic point of view, and that's it. However, nowadays, and especially if one looks at the reports of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there's big discussion about synergies, about win-win situations. And in a world with restricted resources, this is the kind of solutions we should aim for. We should aim for solutions that solve not one of the problems, but many of the problems. We should be careful of solutions that create trade-offs. Fix the one thing while you're destroying the other one. An example of that from my own personal research is the typical problem, or the big problem the African continent faces, of energy access. So in the past, the solution was to try and expand the infrastructure, expand the national grids, to bring energy to the more remote areas or to the more rural areas. Nowadays, the mindset has shifted somehow. Now we have mini-grids, smart grids, we have solar generation into these communities, which makes a difference. And I'm going to tell you now which kind of difference it makes. It's not only energy access that it fixes. Of course, now with energy in these households, the living conditions improve. Indirect effects are vast. Pollution within the household from using dirty fuels has changed, or can change. But also, if we think a little bit more broadly, can we imagine communities, and there are some programs that do that already, but there are communities that now own the solar generation in their area. So what they can do is they develop entrepreneurship skills. They also feel that they have the power as a community. There is income generation opportunities there by selling the excess energy back to the national grids, and all of that by one solution. So energy access, economic poverty, and all of that also without making a new generation of citizens depending on social grants, empowering them to do what they have to do, and making them feel that they own the solutions. Doing all that, making them also feel included in the solutions, in the policy making. So to conclude, I'm here to say science that not only talks, but also listens. Science that is prepared to co-create solutions, and science that collaborates and combines resources for the greater good. Thank you very much.
Your slides will start showing. Here's next, here's back.
Okay. Let me start by saying, Absheni. I am Shangan. In South Africa, I speak Tsonga. I would say bonjour. A little bit of French, but not much. and I'll say good morning to everyone. Minister Nzimande, I think he might be gone. Should I use this one? Okay, Minister Nzimande, I think he's gone. Professor Ramos, fellow panelists, I must say all protocol observed. That's our South African way to say if we did not recognize you, it doesn't mean that you're not important. I'm very glad that I'm part and parcel of this meeting and part and parcel of this summit. So I'm going to be talking to you about science-based policy in fighting poverty, unemployment, and inequality. I will be addressing in this meeting, seems like it's not moving as fast as it should. The slides are not moving. Can you move them, please? I'm going to be addressing, giving you just a short background, introduction, and then I'll look at the extent of poverty and inequality and unemployment at a global level. Then I'll also address the issue of contribution of science to reducing the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And then, of course, I'll end with a short a short conclusion. There is a great interest in the world on how science and technology can contribute to these triple challenges. And this is driven largely by the UN insofar as meeting the Sustainable Development Targets. Scientists have a role to play in testing the effectiveness of the potential interventions so that they can inform government policy as well as government programs. Scientists often conduct impact evaluation just to assess the success of the programs that have been implemented. As you know, in government, you generally just say, well, this thing works, so put money into that. But now scientists are saying, no. Let's evaluate what works so that your budget can actually be informed by scientific outcomes. Scientists also spend a lot of time developing new technologies to be able to uplift the poor. Many of you, when you are coming from the airport into Cape Town, you'll see on your right-hand side a lot of houses, low-income houses, that have got solar geysers. They are sitting on the roof to try to give poor people warm water that you'll be able to get in a traditional place. And that is the result of science. And government has taken into account that science and that technology and implemented it to uplift the poor. Scientists, with their research, they can be able to reach the most marginalized groups because they can go and interview them, find out what are their challenges, and make sure that the challenges they have of access to services can be brought to the attention of government. I will give you an example of how science has been very, very effective in South Africa. We had denialism on HIV in the year 2000 in South Africa, that HIV causes AIDS. You'll all remember the scientists gathered in Durban, and when they were there, they were dealing with this question of HIV doesn't cause AIDS. So many people were dying, antiretroviral therapy was not given to people, yet it was so critical to keep people alive. And what did the scientists do? We decided in South Africa to club up with former President Mandela. And we said, let's produce evidence to show that HIV is prevalent in South Africa. We went, we tested 10,000 people in the country, random, sample, using the most modern scientific approach to be able to assess the prevalence of HIV in the country. And we came back and we said, 1 in 10 South Africans are HIV positive. And those who say they do not believe that HIV causes AIDS are likely to be HIV positive. So which means that they were not taking preventive measures because they believe that they were not at risk. So with that, we're able to change the policy direction of this country to make sure antiretroviral therapy can be made available even to all who needed it. So science does play a critical role in getting services to people. So let me talk a little bit about poverty and talk about how serious the poverty situation is in the world. The Sustainable Development Goal number 1 is really to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. More than 650 million people globally live on less than $1.90 per day. And we all know it has significant health, economic, social, and political impact. People rise up when they are not earning enough money to be able to eke a living. Now, this particular slide shows that there's been a global decline in poverty rates from 10.1% to 8.3% between 2015 and 2018 and 2019. It then increased to 9.2 in 2020. Now, much of this increase in poverty is due to COVID-19. It is due to the war in Ukraine, and it is due to many other factors. Now, for these reasons, scientists have to play a role to provide evidence-based solutions. Now, there are scientific approaches that they have used to end extreme poverty. If you look at 2021, the World Bank, as an example, identified more than 200 cash transfer programs that aim to eliminate extreme poverty in 75 countries. And that is about 92 million people being affected. In other words, it reached out to really 92 million people so that they can be able to access these funds. In West Africa and in East Africa and Kenya, there are 2 examples that I just want to cite. Researchers in the World Bank were undertaking randomized controlled trials by giving unconditional cash transfers and then looking at the outcomes of that. They concluded that in households, that were based in Niger, in Senegal, Mauritania, and Burkina Faso, in 50,000 households who participated in this unconditional cash transfers, they were able to find effective outcomes in terms of people being interested in business. So there was business training, there was coaching to promote self-confidence. That in itself reduced poverty. So they translated the small-scale randomized controlled trials to poverty reduction program as a major challenge. So that was very good what it is that they did. And when they came to the question of Kenya, they ensured that there were monthly installments that were given to people, and people tended to use it for food security. But if they gave them a lump sum payment, they used it for durable goods, like you try to buy furniture, for example. Now, what was interesting in that randomized control trial was that the benefits was improved economic activity as well as psychological well-being, but it did not remain, the benefit did not remain among those who were in the experiment. It spilled over to others. In other words, there is a benefit beyond the experimental grouping. The Consortium of International Agricultural Research Centers in 2021 produced and promoted innovations that were boosting the sustainable production of nutritious food in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America. The main aim was to reduce poverty and malnutrition. And they did so by developing and promoting highly productive crops and livestock breeds which are relevant to the local people. The same thing if you went into the downstairs when we were looking at what the displays that were there, the Agricultural Research Council in South Africa is actually doing some of that kind of work, and that's really fantastic. Now I'm coming to the issue of the extent of unemployment globally. We know that Goal 8 of the Sustainable Development focuses on full and productive employment and decent work, and that we should achieve that, by 2030. We are aware of the fact that the global unemployment increased from 5.4% in 2019 to 6.1% in 2020, and then slightly declined, in 2021. 21 million more people lost jobs in 2021 versus 2018. Of course, it's because of the COVID, problem. These are UN statistics that are available, the latest one in 2020. Now, we do know that COVID-19 contributed to a massive decline in employment because many people resigned from their jobs and never returning. The economy itself was very much affected, and so many people had to lose jobs. Unfortunately, the informal workers were more likely to lose jobs than those who were working in formal employment. And interesting enough, those who were working in informal places were more able to get jobs quicker than those who were actually living in working places. So what I would like to say here is that as the economy was growing during that period, there was a gender dimension to it. Women were not able to get jobs that easily. In fact, they lost more jobs, particularly in our own country, and that is replicated in many other places because they had a care responsibility. They had to take care of, their children. The jobs were lost because people didn't think women were that critical to have at work. They preferred to have men to come back, to work. Young people also lost jobs. People who are disabled also lost jobs, showing very clearly that the impact of COVID in terms of unemployment did not affect everyone equally. There was quite a lot of lack of inclusivity. So what can science actually do? Well, science and technology can contribute to increasing employment by producing new occupations and therefore many jobs. This is not new. Martinez has said that around 2018. For example, if we look at the ICT jobs, the economy was growing in the IT sector, so there were more jobs in the economy area, particularly those that relate to coding, to cloud computing services, cloud security, data management, and so forth. And then we also saw that there was quite a lot of training that was taking place during the COVID, period in order to create new jobs for those that are going to be training others. So the train-the-trainer programs in the ICT area actually grew very much. And what was really good is that the graduates of these particular programs in ICT created jobs for themselves as well as for others. Of course, if you look at in terms of creation of jobs, you look at the SKA, about 20,000 jobs are going to be created in South Africa. And I'm sure it will be the same in other countries that are part and parcel of the SKA. So, but it's not all good and wonderful that science is actually doing that. It can also create a problem because when you start using ICT and other technologies to automate systems, you do find that the unskilled people are displaced from work. So here you are, you've got the economy that's booming this side, you have got many more people that are becoming unskilled and not able to participate in the benefit of the country, meaning that government policy has to move rapidly with new technology, new science and new technology in order to improve. Now I'm coming to the issue of inequality. Goal 10 of the Sustainable Development requires that we reduce inequality within and among countries. In other words, we have to deal with the question of income earning. We have to look at it in terms of what's happening in terms of earning income as one of the indicators of inequality. An average adult individual earns a purchasing power parity of about $23,380 per year, and that was in 2021. So what it is that the richest 10% of the global population takes 52% of the global income, whereas the poorest half of the population earns 8.5%. Now, on average, an individual from the top 10% of the global income distribution earns about $122,100 per year, whereas that individual who comes from the poorest half of the global income distribution makes about $3,920 per year. Now, the poorest half of the global population barely owns any wealth at all, at about 2% of the total. In contrast, the richest 10% of the global population owns 76% of the wealth. Such massive disparities, massive inequalities. And gender inequality should also be considered as we are looking for all of this, because females account for only 35% of global labor income. The other 65% goes to men. And we as women do not benefit as much compared to men. So, what can science do to contribute to reducing inequality? Well, we should say that we need to research and develop new technologies so that we can improve the quality of life of the poor, so that their lives can also change. It means that we must be able to develop technology that will ensure access to clean water. If I think of what the South African, American Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, who came into the Eastern Cape and realized that in the rural areas people do not have water, decided to use drones and deliver technology in the rural area that would really produce water from the atmosphere. People there in rural area now can open a tap and be able to get water because he decided to really bring technology to rural areas. We need many more of those experiments to go to those rural areas where people do not have services to make sure that they do get, services. And of course, there are other benefits that we have, childhood vaccines. If we didn't have childhood vaccines and we did not apply them all over the world, really would be having many more children dying unnecessarily. But research also is beneficial in terms of reducing inequality by exposing inequality. When you conduct that research where you look at those that have and those that don't have, our country being one of the most unequal in the world, if you continue to show that information, you are actually forcing government to change its policies and redirect the resources to where they are needed most. And that's where science becomes very critical. Also, science produces affordable solutions that poor people can access, such as a means of communication. For example, cell phone technology has helped many poor countries to leapfrog in communication and banking. I'll give you a short example. In 1996, I went to Indonesia, and I was leading the group as I was Director General of Health in South Africa. We were to organize a bilateral meeting between the US and South Africa. And I took up a small little thing here, which today may be called a cell phone, and I made a call to the US. My counterpart in the US asked the question, what is that? Why are you using this little thing to make a call to the United States? How does it work? And I said to them, oh, I'm sorry, you are still far behind because you are still using the phones that are really connected to lines. We are now actually using, technology through satellites to be able to get communication at that particular point in time. So Africa had leapfrogged because of technology. We did not have to wait to deal with the usual phones, but to come up with new technologies. So science does promote, but science also, let me say that it can actually promote inequality. I'm almost done. There is a reward system that really exists. Science can promote inequality because of the built-in reward system. Outstanding researchers tend to receive the bulk of funds to conduct clinical trials among poor people. Those in high-income countries, funded by taxpayers' money, conduct research in low and lower middle-income countries, but the benefits are given to pharmaceutical companies who produce therapeutics and vaccines to be given first to high-income countries, leaving out those who contributed to the outcome of scientific studies. This winner-takes-all in science can increase inequality and fragmentation of societies. Those with adequate research funds benefit their society to the exclusion of those countries with no research policy. In conclusion, I want to say science and technology has a significant role in addressing the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. It does inform policy and program design, but we must remember that the path from science to policy is not always linear. It can be curvilinear. It can also have negative consequences if government planning is adequate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Honorable Minister, distinguished panelists, Your Excellency Assistant DG for the Social and Human Sciences, I think she's left. All protocols observed. Ladies and gentlemen, what a great honor it is to be asked to speak at this landmark World Science Forum. And what a responsibility we all have to address the most pressing issues of our age, to assess how we can contribute solutions, and more importantly, to recognize our failures so that we may learn and progress. Each of us here today, and every fellow human being on this planet, is possessed of a dignity that is essential and inviolable. It arises from our essence as human beings, with the rights and responsibilities that each member of our human race must share equally. Doubtless all of us at this forum would agree with those words, and we would hold that they underpin everything we do as scientists, science diplomats, and science enablers. Indeed, we would all hold this to be true, and yet, the people of our world are clearly not treated equally. Vast and growing disparities within and between societies make a mockery of those words. Stark realities belie a system of rights that defines the work of the organizations and individuals represented here today. And I would contend that science, though it holds so many of the answers that we all seek, has also enabled and continues to empower systems that separate our people and destroy hope for so many. Science has a sometimes dark heritage and a present footprint that enables systems of excess and exploitation. Science indeed has a lot to reckon with, but we know that it has the greatest opportunity in human history to make amends and to create a future in which human dignity is the defining characteristic of our societies and our interactions. But science, good science, must be emboldened to challenge vested interests and to find a voice that is constant and challenging. Ladies and gentlemen, so many people around the world have become alienated from the very sources and supply hubs of their everyday necessities. As our global population burgeons, supply chains become increasingly strained, and for many, they simply no longer exist. We are very close to seeing a globalized network of basic supply chains shatter in a catastrophic fashion. The fact is that global commercial dynamics have for so many decades dictated to us a sourcing and supply system that is no longer fit for purpose, either for people or for the planet. Logistics outweigh local production, and consolidation of ownership across borders and sectors have distanced so many of us from the source of basic commodities, those that are fundamental to ensuring that any individual may live with dignity and may have the opportunity to live securely and with hope for a worthy future. The ties that unite are more than equaled by the ties that bind and break lives all around the world, as globalized trade has in many places destroyed jobs and independent livelihoods. It has felled forests and polluted our oceans and removed the hopes of autonomy and dignity from so many communities. Now, I'm not suggesting that we break monopolies and shatter the means of multinational production and distribution. I'm not quite the Red Princess. But nor should we allow our discourse on the role of science in changing systems and securing human dignity to fall victim to the culture wars between right and left that dominate and polarize the politics of many nations of influence. There is certainly no place for ideology in our discussions. But we must, as a global science community, acknowledge that autonomy and security of those basic resources that are required for life are essential to human dignity. Recent conflict has highlighted how vast single-source supplies of some basic foodstuffs can very quickly become hostages to fortune. Indeed, conflict is causing today's challenge for many, but it may inevitably be climate change, disease, or some other catastrophic event tomorrow. We must acknowledge the vast body of science that has enabled a form of globalization that harms and enriches a few. We have emerged from 2 centuries of the science of plenty in much of the global north, an age of spectacular achievement driven by commerce, trade, and the excessive consumption of resources. Of course, this was also an age that led to the material improvement of lives across the globe, but we have reached a tipping point where excess is no longer viable and where innovation is urgently required to right past wrongs and to secure a future for all. Our age is one where the centrality of human dignity is not just desirable, but essential. Science was at the center of that spectacle of growth that has led us to climate catastrophe and looming conflicts over dwindling resources. From steam power to the combustion engine, and from gas lights to power grid meltdowns, we have enabled great strides forward and the greatest threats to our human family. So now we have entered an age of want, where vital resources are depleted, and a future that was not foreseen through years of excess is becoming an increasing likely reality. Perhaps it would be harsh to say that science has a debt to pay, but in truth, it does. Science was mastered by commerce, and our world has suffered the consequences. But there is hope, and we must have ambition. The lives of humans across the planet have never been more intertwined, and in so many ways that is something to celebrate. Our gathering here in Cape Town emphasizes the positivity of global exchange, where ideas and experiences are shared and common causes of equality, opportunity, and social justice are affirmed and acted upon. But our common agreement on the centrality and essence of human dignity must not echo in a silo. We must make our case in novel, confident, and forceful ways. We must, of course, continue to engage with policymakers, but we cannot accept so readily their constraints and conditions. We must ensure that we unite and emerge from these halls such as this, with a consistent and cohesive message, one that can be delivered also to the public. But perhaps most importantly, we must engage with global commerce and industry in brave and innovative ways. Science helped to build these systems, and we must speak out to help rebuild them in a way that works for humanity and for the planet. That might sound naive to so many, and I believe that's why science diplomacy engages so little with commerce and industry. But the real naivety lies in a failure to present the full force of our arguments to those who have empowered over centuries. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists, I feel that it is quite a large ask, and I doubt that I'm giving much useful direction on how to achieve it. But I do believe that it must be said. In our recent shared human history, science, that incomparable gift of humanity to make, create, and innovate, had lost its way. We constitute the rump representatives of all that science can do to restore and renew hope. Our science can make human dignity a concept, in fact, and not a concept of aspiration. But we must engage, challenge, and secure the compromised world that we have created. Thank you very much.
Before I call Michelle on stage and he has a presentation, let me just do justice to introducing him. He's the chairperson of the Cape Town Declaration on Science for Social Justice and has been tirelessly working for all of us to be here since 2017 until to date. He's the member of the Global Commission on Drug Policy and a former UN part of the envoy for the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Apologies for not properly acknowledging the work that you have done behind the scenes for so many years. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone, dear colleagues, fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like from the start to thank the government of South Africa and the organizers of this conference for allowing me to speak to you this morning. The point I'd like to make, I'm speaking from a health perspective, is that the fight for health, the fight for promoting the well-being of people cannot be dissociated from the fight for social justice. And that can be basically the message I'd like to deliver, is that science for health is science for health justice, for social justice. And as you can see on this slide, I can see really how objective 3 of the SDGs and objective 16 promote a peaceful and inclusive society for sustainable development come together. And that's really what I'd like to discuss here. Now, for many years, if you think of the 80s, the 90s, health was a health sector. The focus of medicine was primarily to address disease. Medical sciences, health systems were focused on innovation, delivering therapy, delivery of care. But our concepts have now shifted in the last 15, 20 years, but particularly since 2015 and our agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have now fully included prevention and promotion of well-being as what we expect medicine to deliver. And well-being here is understood as physical, mental, and social. And we've understood that the outcome of health are profoundly dependent on what we call determinants of health. And among these determinants, there are social determinants of health, commercial determinants, behavioral, political, environmental, and economic. And many of you will have realized, listening particularly to what Olivier Chisana has said, how we may be exposed to the same virus equally, but the impact of that virus on our lives will be different and based on inequalities, economic inequalities, decisions of politicians in our countries on policies, behaviors of people, influence of the commercial sector, basically inequities. And this is something we have actually known for quite some time. As I said yesterday evening, for those of us who come from the HIV world and HIV community, we've known for a long time that inequalities undermine the AIDS response for all, and that inequities are fundamental to understanding the AIDS epidemic, how it propagates and how it impacts on people. Clearly, people with less social power and fewer protections under the law are often at higher risk of HIV infection. And I'll just give a few examples here, which again I mentioned yesterday evening. Adolescent girls and young women, that is aged between 15 and 24, in sub-Saharan Africa are 3 times more likely to acquire HIV than adolescent boys and young men. What we call key populations that are stigmatized, marginalized in societies, they account for maybe 5% of the global population. However, they and their sexual partners account for 70% of new infections currently with HIV. Another number I quoted yesterday, people who inject drugs and men having sex with men have a 35 times and 28 times greater risk of acquiring HIV than the general population, respectively. How inequities determine the impact of a virus which by itself does not discriminate between people was also particularly clear during the COVID pandemic, and many of my fellow panelists discussed that earlier. This is a slide from November 2021, but things haven't changed. It shows the share of population that has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by country income level. You can see on the very top the two curves of the high income and of the upper middle income countries. The difference, they actually reach the same at that time, 70% fully vaccinated population. The red curve of the upper middle income, the way it's shaped reflects the fact that vaccination started later by a few months as compared to high-income countries. Then you see in blue the mean world vaccination coverage, in yellow lower middle income countries, and in red low-income countries. As we speak today, 18 billion doses of COVID vaccines have been administered throughout the world. Of these, as a result, 85% of the people in high-income and upper-middle-income countries have been fully vaccinated and received 1, 2, or even 3 booster doses, whereas only 24% of the population in low-income countries have received at least 1 dose of vaccine. Another example, and sorry, the slide was cut, so the title disappeared for some reason. This is a study showing that the greater the within-country income inequality is, that is the difference between the rich and the poor, the greater on the ordinate has been the excess mortality linked to COVID. As you know, there may have been 5, maybe 6 million people who've died directly of COVID, and here I'm talking about pneumonia, about how COVID has impacted on some of the comorbidities, diabetes, and so on. But the current estimate of mortality from COVID is 17 million deaths. And those excess deaths, that excess mortality death, is about the comorbidities, being them medical or social. COVID has clearly impacted much more on the poor, people who earn every day what is needed to feed their family during confinement, moved to extreme poverty and couldn't, of course, access healthcare in proper conditions. And that's what this sort of curve, again, apology for the slides, is showing. One of the, to me, fascinating features of this relationship between determinants of health and ultimate health of people is that many key issues around our health are not negotiated in ministries of health or between ministers of health, but somewhere else. Inequities are, of course, discussed at government level. Environment and its impact on our health is discussed elsewhere. Our ways of life, let's say, for example, obesity, is discussed, at least a key determinant of obesity, which is sugar in sugary drinks, is discussed in the boards of multinational companies rather than at the level of ministers of health. And again, that I take this as an illustration of this new, very different ways of looking at health. So health, to me, comes here as a political, medical, and scientific domain where a diversity of actors and disciplines interact with each other, and a domain that we should look at as being anchored in a globalized world characterized by interrelated crises, environmental, social, health-related, and increasing inequities in living conditions, resources, access to medicines, and international trade. So it is a field that is primarily political at the end, and that calls for political answers. How do we negotiate the choice of health and therefore the choice of social justice against other social, economic, or political priorities that are not directly related to health? And so health is now all around the global agenda. It is on the agenda of development because promoting health is building human capital, but it is also on the security agenda, as we saw with COVID-19. It's on the trade and economic agenda. It is on the social justice agenda of human rights. It is on the foreign policy agenda. It is on the agenda of these global interdependent crises. In a context where we're learning the benefits we received from globalization, but also the limitations that our globalized world is imposing on us. A world of changing demography, a world that is more and more urbanized, a world that is more and more commercial, with new economic powers, new distribution of inequities within and between countries, and a world that has become multipolar and very polarized from a political perspective. And if we look at today, as we meet December 2022, and as discussed by a number of previous speakers today, progress towards most of the SDGs is actually moving backwards. Oliver showed the slide from the SDG 2022 report that was very clear on this. Increasing global poverty, reversing trends in reducing inequalities within and between countries. And then debates on health and development becoming more and more politicized, weakening multilateralism, increasing sovereignism and nationalism in the face of interdependency. It's interesting to see how the more we're interconnected in this world, the more the world is globalized, and the more our behaviors are individual and protective. Then there's this conflict, or what I call here a conflict between norms and ideology, which is basically refuting standards and moving based on ideology rather than on evidence. An increasing power of multinational companies. And as was discussed at the recent COP27, how will we be able to meet the need of all people within the means of a living planet? So that's the context in which those interactions between health and social justice are taking place. You've seen of some of my slides the wording global health, and I'm showing this one to illustrate the fact that health at global level, health at national level, and health at local, district, or city level, or village level cannot really be dissociated, and these circles interact. Of course, a global pandemic will clearly be also a national and a local pandemic, but the determinants of health that will play out at local levels are determinants of health at national level, and as I said before, they're clearly set up at global level. So I'll end with what I think is the best definition of health at this time. Health is a precondition, an outcome, and an indicator of a sustainable society, and should be adopted as a universal value and a shared social and political objective for all. And I suggest that we interchange health for social justice. Social justice is a precondition, outcome, and indicator of a sustainable society, and should be adopted as a universal value and a shared social and political objective for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our distinguished panel members. We've had a lot of presentations, and I was nudged, I think, by Professor Asher for us to open up to hear other voices. Unlike other conferences, we are gathered here because all of us are scientists, are scholars, are thinkers. Can I ask that your questions be reframed to be statements or comments from your vantage point as a scientist, as a scholar, so that all of us can hear each other instead of question and answer, as if you don't have anything to contribute. So I'm opening this as a session for all of you to contribute to this discussion and ultimately to our declaration that we want to adopt on Friday. So, Professor Asher, here, there are mics on the corridors, so maybe if you can find a mic. I'm recognizing you, there's a mic here in the corridor. Can I just also recognize two people? If I intimidated you with a comment and contribution, so maybe take that as a question. I'll recognize you as well. There's someone here and there, and then we can close. If there's a burning comment, okay, there's a burning comment, and then we'll also ask our panelists to have final reflections of about 30 seconds each. All right, Professor Asher.
Thank you.
Can you also just introduce yourselves, and maybe I'm just
Yes,
not pronouncing your surnames correctly.
Michael Achia, Past President of the Academy of Science of Mauritius. Thank you for those 6 wonderful inputs. One thing for which I'm fighting for, which I'd like to raise again, which is very relevant to what we've been talking about, is for science-based, or also called evidence-based decision-making. So many decisions in the world, from the level of presidents, prime ministers, ministers, or ordinary civil servants, are taken without taking in consideration the existing science. And you know, the huge amount of research that has been done, the amount of evidence we have on so many subjects, and yet, when decisions are taken, whether Russia going to war, or a simple thing like filling a marsh and building on it, so many things are done with other considerations in mind, money, politics, my friends, or whatever, don't need to go into that. I'll end by that, by coming to that again. What the world needs at the 3 levels, at global level, African level, and local level, is decision-making where, and I think decision-makers, this is a positive thing, must be trained to do that. When they are faced with a decision, instead of just signing it, okay, right, to analyze the evidence available in that particular field. And I'm not talking of political evidence, scientific evidence. And then the decisions taken are going to be for the benefit of nature, benefit of people, and the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I get maybe the person here, just behind you? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. It's Morakane Madiba from Environmental Learning and Research Center, Rhodes University, South Africa. And it's not a question or comment, it's just a mixed ideas around, it could be an issue of semantics here. and especially around the concept that says science for. I'm very battling to understand that concept as science for. It's science for as comparison with science with. And why I'm saying that the concept of science for could be carrying some hidden connotations around that, especially connotations around power relations, and this that I'm battling with. It's in response to this concept that you've all been talking about, and since even yesterday, of inequality. And I see the inequality of knowledges, especially when we speak of science for, and what it does as well. We overlook the ability of science to develop agency. We overlook the ability of science of ownership, of responsibility, willingness, and determination, especially if we are science is to respond to the concept of sustainability. And it does as well, science for create, again, the connotation of us and them. And I'm looking at these things in the nexus of science policy and the public, and then I think that's the reason why the idea of science for social justice. And then lastly, and I would like to speak about this concept of social justice, that I feel like it's not enough, because social justice is a legal term, but we need to really re-emphasize the concept of social ethics. I think there's a lot of people who have spoken about it, and since yesterday, and social ethics, because it does not only speak of legal things, but it speaks of the way of life. It speaks of the values. It speaks of relationships and that. So yeah, I think that's my contribution.
Thank you so much. There are two questions here. There's one right at the back. Can you use that mic? And there's someone here, if you can.
And I'm also been here. I've been standing here, this side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you allow me to assist with the discussion?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Can I move this side? I'll come back to you. Can I move this side? There's the gentleman right at the back. Can you take the mic and address us?
Yeah, thank you very much for the good insights. Alfred Bizoza from the University of Rwanda. Two comments I want to add to this discussion. To what extent are we inclusive, especially in forums like this, bringing citizens or respondents or participants to different research that we have conducted to project these facts? We talk about unemployment. We have different organizations representing people or labor organizations. To what extent are they participating in these forums so that at least we have their voices as we discuss such very important aspect touching their lives? So maybe we need to think about this as we move forward. Now, the second aspect is now on the linkage between science and policy. Don't we think that we also need to put more efforts on creating and innovating on frameworks that will bring together the scientists and the policymakers to sit together? Because the decision was taken by policymakers using some of the facts, and then later we see the outcome of those results. Is there a win-win situation where such discussion happens? And who is going to initiate that? That's a reflection. Maybe we need to put our effort in that regard as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will have a question here, and then we'll move that side. Sir, there's a mic right next to you. If you can just introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kutulo Kukumani Mugarameti. I'm originally from Mafefe, in the deepest villages in Limpopo under Lepelle Nkumbi local municipality. It's very, very privileged for me to be here as one of the young people from the rural areas. And for that, I'll say thank you very much to give me an opportunity to speak for my fellow brothers and sisters. I'm sorry I'm not going to make any comment, but I'm going to ask from the panels, from the officials, everyone who's here, that how easy possible is to take such programs as these ones to deepest villages that are, disadvantages. I see it not fashionable for such events to come to the villages, and that's where we can have real conversations about this. We are having treble problems here, as I indicated. I'm calling them treble problems because they are problems. Inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Those three keys. When I drove in Cape Town, I can see people from here, they are almost having them all. But real people that they can have real conversation about this matter, they are at the rural places. We spoke about science taking the problems of social into science to tend to change them to be solved. But at rural areas, firstly, we don't have networks. Network, it's a problem. I don't want to talk about data. I want to talk about network where I have to go to climb to the mountain before I can get a link to apply to be part of the program like this one. So please try to do it as easy as possible to get these type of programs to the people, for you guys to have real problems about these problems that we are discussing now, because we don't hear real problems here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There are about 3 hands, 1, 2, 3, that we still need to recognize. I'll recognize you 4. May I just ask, there is a global leadership network meeting that has started 3 minutes ago. Please allow me to allow Professor Sishan, Olive Sishan, to give concluding remarks before we excuse her from the meeting. Sorry, I'm in a rush as well.
Okay, thank you very much. My last point is really that when government funds research and technology to its statutory bodies, it must actually help to commercialize it in such a way that it can address poverty, unemployment, and inequality. That's all I'm asking of all the governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and you are excused, and it has been a privilege to at least chair a session where you are present. Thanks. All right. All right. We have colleagues, friends. I know that we are supposed to have ended at 11. Now that we started at 11:06, can I just ask for your indulgence for another 2 more minutes, as the next 4 speakers are going to be very, very quick and brief. Let's start right in front. There's a mic there. Sir.
I'm Professor Murenzi. I had an opportunity to serve as Rwandan Minister of Education from 2001 to 2006. And I was very interested by the comment or the intervention of the young scientists on the comparison between girls and boys. During that period of the 2001 and 6, so during the time of the Education for All, we realized that we had more girls entering in primary school, but as we were progressing between primary 1 to 3 or 4, 5, we have less and less girls. And as we were going to primary 6, going to secondary school, we have less girls. So we did, with a Forum of African Women Educationalists called FAWE, we did a study actually into families. And then we realized actually, when there was a boy and a girl in a family, the family was betting on the boy. So the boy will arrive, they arrive at home, and then the mother will say, you can study, and the girl, come and help me. So this means the girls will be asked to help the mom and the family to bring water, and the boy will be actually studying. So as they were doing that, you see, boys will be progressing more and more. And then we did a campaign on that, and that was really very, very helpful actually in actually trying to address that particular issue. I just wanted to give
Thank you so much. And she interrupted, and now I'm in trouble for not recognizing her first. She's right at the back.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm called Dorcas Zakulichel from Uganda. I'm from a very local place. Sorry for that. But really, I'm not going to talk internationally, but I'll go best local from where I came from. Basing from where I came from the district, the region where where LRA, if you remember that Joseph Kony, the person who killed so many Ugandans during that time, we had a lot of bombs, guns, and our environment was really destroyed. Basing on environment, because our program is basing on science. Science for everyone, for social justice. I'm a journalist, a media person. I came here, they invited me to participate because I registered online. So I was so happy because I knew from here, our voices will be heard. The way my friend, I don't remember the country he came from, he said that this program should really reach the local people. Because basing on science or environment, like us whose land was really destroyed by the bombs, we need a lot of knowledge to plant more trees, climate change, and so many things. So right now, as I'm talking, in other districts, you'll find a lot of floods, flashing away houses, flashing away people, and other things. So if science, this program reached the local people, like us in Uganda, the northern part, where bombs were destroyed, people were killed, and the land is really destroyed, the environment is very bad. Basing on science, this can really help us so much because the people will get to know what they're supposed to do on the environment, and the climate change, what we are fighting for, will really be very important and will not cry for anything. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Two last comments. I promise these are two last comments. I can see hands. I'm going to pretend like this light is shining so brightly in my face, my eyes, that I'm not seeing the other hand. So there are only last two. Yes, sir. You may continue, sir.
Thank you very much. Jonathan Dawes. I'm from the UK, as you've probably worked out already, and I work at the University of Bath. I wanted to offer a very brief reflection on everything I've listened to, some wonderful presentations this morning. It felt like there was at least some implicit criticism of a neoliberal market understanding and the way that science has linked to the kind of military-industrial complex in the past. And I wanted to reflect that maybe this means we should work actively to encourage more humanity in the scientific enterprise. And as an educationalist, maybe this means more humanities. So more history, more language, more anthropology, perhaps, in the way that we educate our scientists. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. The gentleman on that side.
Good morning. My name is Euclides Sakomboy. I am from Angola, Agostinho Neto University. My question is for the last speakers about COVID-19. 2 years ago, I wrote one paper. The title is What's Angola Learned with the World and the World with COVID-19, where I was talking about the different conditions to fight the same problem. And in this paper, I was talking about the water, I was talking about the light, I was talking about the money for have food peoples. In some countries, government give money for people staying home. In our country, people have many problems, could still in home, but the government took bullet to put people in the home with the hungry, with no water, with no light. My question is, what we need to do to change this problem? Because the pandemic and endemic disease will come time and time. What we can do to have the same ability to stop disease? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for participating. I can't be gender blind. Any female in the room who wants to contribute? Final, going. The lady right at the back, you'll have the last say. I'm sure I'm going to be forgiven this side.
Good morning.
Yes.
My name is Londiwe Kaluza, and I am coming from CIRA, which is the regulator for private security in South Africa. So I wanted to just ask to the panel. Yes, you've presented on technology, how it can benefit in ensuring social justice. But my question is the matter of accessibility of this technology, because it's not everyone who's able to get access to this technology. I'll make an example. We now have drones within the private security industry, and you find that your bigger companies are able to purchase these drones and offer the service to people. And the smaller companies are then not able to get jobs because of this. So I want to know and find out, what is the plan when it comes to accessibility of technology for everyone? Because technology, as I think it's Olivia had stated, is that yes, data will be collected from poor people, but it's sold to the richer people. So what is the solution when it comes to accessibility and ensuring that everyone has equal access to technology?
Thank you so much. Let's have concluding remarks from each panelist, about 5 seconds. I don't know how many sentences you can squeeze in 5 seconds. Let's start with Amy.
Yeah, maybe a lot of interesting discussion. I think one thing that we need to do is to have more what I will call bilingual people that understand science and understand policy. We don't have enough of these experts. And then science advice is different at different level, national, global, and local. So we need to build capacity there as well.
Thank you so much.
So we discuss about inequality, poverty, and unemployment to a room full of people that are not poor or unemployed. So I get the point that many of the colleagues made. And I think that's a wonderful idea to take to the World Science Forum Steering and Organizing Committee, that we need to include maybe a session or two in all of future fora where we invite communities to come and share with us and come be with us. So all of this is a system. Science and technology, society, communities, policy making, all of this is a system. It needs to work as a system, and at the moment, there are many of these interactions bi-directional and unidirectional that are cut. We need to make them stronger. So the question is not anymore when and why, but the progress should be made, should have been made already. So the question is, why not yet? And how fast can we catch up? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Highness.
So thank you very much for that. I'd like to pick up on the question that that was just asked, the last one, about how we can make technology accessible. And I think that one of the biggest issues that would impact my closing statement is, as you said, it's systems and ecosystems, but it's also cross-fertilization of ideas. It's making sure that all stakeholders have an equal voice. I think that we, as I mentioned in my in my speech, that it's not just about having human dignity or having slogans that say science is about investing in human dignity if we're not actually measuring the impact of what we are doing and making sure that it is actually reaching the people who matter most. And just very quickly, I would say that talking about the need for more innovations, one of the things that in my organization we're doing, for example, is we're very proud of a water harvesting creation which will allow people to have the dignity of creating and accessing their own clean water, because that's what it really matters about at the end of the day, is that people feel that they are equal and that there is equity in the science innovations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Michelle?
Thank you very much. To our colleague from Angola who spoke on COVID-19, I'd just like to say that the question is now, will the world be able to learn the lessons from the pandemic at country level and at global level? At global level, there's currently a process that started in Geneva of negotiating a new international treaty that will be a binding treaty to countries on pandemic preparedness and response that should hopefully bring a number of answers to questions raised by why didn't we react to this virus early enough? Why did we leave this virus from an early outbreak on 15th of December 2019 in Wuhan become an epidemic and then a global pandemic that within weeks took over the world? So, but I'll be pleased to continue the discussion with you outside the room. Let me just make one more point. I've heard a lot of discussion here about the disconnect between the science, the evidence, and the policy making. And I'd like just to draw the attention of colleagues in the room to what is called the Brussels Declaration, which is a process very close to the World Science Forum. And that declaration was launched by Minister Pandor at the AAAS in 2017. And it's not a declaration from an interest group. It is the result of several months of work, years of work, sorry, of hundreds of people associating scientists, policymakers, private sector, civil society, media. So a truly inclusive process leading to a declaration on the ethics of the relationship between science, evidence, and policy making. And I would like not only to draw your attention to that declaration, it's worth going back to it, but I would also like everyone to keep that in mind as we build on to the new declaration, the Cape Town Declaration that is to come.
Thank you so much. Let me not waste more time. I want to acknowledge our speakers. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for attending, and for those who attended. I want to apologize for not recognizing some of my colleagues and friends who wanted to participate. Our next session starts in 10 minutes. Thank you so much for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.